I really hope that the comic edition capsule continues past the first 5 figures that have already been released, because I'm loving this line. So far it's the first capsule I've ever bought every release from. Yes, Flame and Zaram will be next week, and it has so much to offer. The G1 Marvel comics were brimming with original characters that never made it to screen or toy at the time, and hardly get releases today. But the comic edition has given us what I feel is one of the definitive D-list 86 Decepticons. Yes, I think comic edition Straxus is good enough that it'll never be topped at mainline, since they really picked the perfect mold for him, that being the Kingdom Galvatron mold, which was one of my favourite figures ever at the time of its release, and I imagine its repaints will receive a good proper look in the new year, stay tuned. But for the mold's first appearance on the show, how does this iteration hold up? Well, the sculpted detail and proportions on this figure are incredible. I love the way that this guy looks. There's so much detail in the sculpt, and while it is very well defined, it's very soft, which I think pairs beautifully with both the size of this guy and the large rounded surfaces all over him. This guy looks like he'd be absolutely titanic, and there's a real impact to the design. This is the closest the Transformers franchise has to Darth Vader in my books. Come on, there's a resemblance. It might just be the tall rounded head, the wide shoulder line, or the high impact torso panels, but regardless of what feature you're looking at, the figure tends to speak for itself. Now, this is a remold of course, and while you can definitely see the mold is shared, a lot of this figure's surfaces are completely new. The knee pads, crotch plate, forearms, shoulder kibble, chest, head, and back are all new components, and they do wonders for the look of this figure. He really makes the mold his own. I think the most minor change here that matters a lot is the lack of knee pads. It really changes the way his proportions feel. Galvatron felt very limber and leggy. Straxus feels decidedly broad and top-heavy. I have few to no qualms about the look of this guy, aside from one thing. The main deviation of this figure from the particular design that it's pulling from is the addition of the shoulder pylons that are kept from Galvatron. They weren't present in the comics, they are here, and I really like the addition. I know it's mostly a structural thing for the transformation, but it really adds to the look in a positive way, and it makes the figure's silhouette that much more distinctive. The colour choices on this figure are very much on the same page as the prior releases. The blue and red shades of plastic are nearly identical to the ones on Grimlock, but with a much paler grey that works very well alongside the soft but vibrant colour work. The paint here might be my favourite of the capsule. There's a very even amount of shading across the figure, like on Shockwave, but it's not quite so overpowering. The black lines of shadow are primarily used to provide depth to ridges and drops in the surfaces on the figure, while still having some shadowy moments that imply the light direction. That, combined with the sparse half-tone dots on the figure's chest and shins, make for a very subtle but rich package. The only aspect of the paint I'm disappointed in is the shoulder coverage. The red paint here is not the most durable, and I have noticed some chipping around the tabs. Be gentle when handling and transforming these parts, I'd say. But that aside, I really can't get over the look of this figure. I just love how colourful it is overall, and yet it still has a very distinctive air of menace. It's incredible that a design this good hasn't popped up in more media. Now, as for accessories, the figure comes with a blaster. It's pretty simple. I like the angle to the barrel, but it is designed more for the alt mode than the robot, and because of that, it has a pretty solid blending inch spot on the back. Instead, for this mode, you can give him his pick-ass kick-axe. What? I love all the details on it, the little gaps and pistons. This is absolutely a standout feature piece. It looks fantastic in the figure's hand, and if you mess with the back kibble a little, you can't have it in on the back. But why would you keep it there when the figure has the articulation to make this accessory shine? That being said, the head is pretty limited. It can move around on its ball joint, but it resists the positions you leave it in a little bit. The shoulders can move all the way up and go all the way around with ease. There's bicep swivels, double elbows, wrist swivels. He has a waist swivel. The hip skirts can move out of the way for some good motion out, and a decent forward and back. There's thigh swivels, slightly below average knees, and decent ankle pivots. The posing here is very good. The additional range in the shoulders helps a lot with posing the pickaxe, but there are some small issues that I have. The front hip skirt can pop off pretty easily. It's not the biggest problem to get back on, but it can be a pain to work around. But more annoyingly, the heels don't sit flat with the figure, a problem that was also present on Galvatron. The figure rocks back and forth a lot, and it can really affect the stability of some poses, as well as just the overall fun factor of the figure. You can flatten out the heels a little once you get him into a pose, but it doesn't take away from the overall annoyance. But those two things aside, I have no real complaints about the robot mode. The transformation on this figure is one that I've always appreciated. It manages to be both simple and advanced, and surprisingly improves on the Galvatron version in some ways. The chest plate hinges to conform to the front barrel, the strut at the back has some stoppers so it sits at a natural angle, the wings on the sides have proper locking tabs, and even the barrel tabbing in has some proper slots to keep it in the right place. And adding the accessories, you're left with a pretty accurate version of Straxus' cannon mode. This thing is supposed to fly. Do what you will with that information. Right away, this is kind of a bullshit alt mode, but I quite like it. There's a lot of details I really enjoy. The geometric wings with all their little pops of detail, the tube-like main body, all the sharp angles on top. Admittedly, it's hard to know exactly what you're looking at beyond the cannon with this thing, but I do think it works well for what it is. The cannon and pickaxe work into the aesthetic very well, the deco remains consistent along this, unlike some of the other alt modes in this subline. I only have a couple of real problems with this in the build department. The back end struggles to stay tabbed together. It's not a huge deal, but if you display this thing in the air, then it might become an issue, if you can manage to display this thing in the air. Because, as far as I can tell, there isn't a stand port on this figure. Had to balance it with these shots. That's okay, as much as this is supposed to be a flying cannon from space, it somehow rolls better than most car formers I've got, and I gotta admit I'm way more sold on this than Galvatron in this mode. I just think it's more consistent, and I think that the wings do a lot of the heavy lifting. But in all honesty, I doubt anyone's buying this figure for the alt mode. Straxus' robot mode is absolutely superb. It manages to capture many of the things that make both this capsule and the Transformers toy line as a whole worth collecting. It's fun, it's solid, it looks incredible, and overall I'd say it's tied with Grimlock for my favourite figure from the comic edition. I would absolutely recommend this figure to any fan of the character or anyone in need of a big new Decepticon boss man, or even if you've never experienced this mold before. It's a tremendous figure, and I do think that this is my favourite version of the Kingdom Galvatron mold. But you know what, that might change soon, so feel free to comment which version is your favourite, and subscribe to catch the inevitable sequel episode in a few months' time. And if you've done those, then you might as well bring it full circle and drop us a like too. Anything to help the channel out. I'll catch you next week for a look at Zaron and Flames, so stay tuned, and right now, I am gonna look up chiropractors in my area or chair companies that I can try to get to sponsor me. I'm too young for my back to sound like a ratchet set. Oh.